Faction balance has been a pretty hot topic from day one of Classic. After all, it is one of the first choices you make when you commit to your character, Horde or Alliance. This choice will determine who you can interact with, trade with, communicate with, and play with before you can even log into the game. It's a pretty big deal. And on Classic, your faction matters. Well, it used to. Maybe that's less of the case nowadays. After all, we still do have the old school PvP and PvE server split, and being the minority faction on a PvP server is simply not an experience that many players would actively seek out. That lone warrior fantasy traveling the lands by themselves runs into problems when you realize so much of the content in the game quite literally requires a group, and you can't even go and pick herbs out in the open world without being ganked. Over time, we've seen a shift from somewhat balanced servers in the early days of Classic to the player base on the vast majority of servers actively sorting themselves onto realms where they are the majority, realms where they are technically PvP tags but where world PvP no longer happens, the 99% of one faction and the 1% of the other servers. And this has been a choice that the players have actively made and that Blizzard has failed to stop. Nothing has really ended up changing with how the servers work. It's been like a copy-paste of what happened with the retail version of the game. Players realised more people are on a different server from themselves and ended up making the swap, be it from real money or a free transfer. Except in Classic, as it tends to be the case, things have happened at a much faster rate. After all, as we started with, your faction is inherently a massive restriction. It's required for such simple things in an online world, and of course players will trend towards the best, largest environment where interactions can happen. You might even think the game would do better without the restriction of factions. Let players choose their allies and their enemies within the game, instead of having such an arbitrary system which determines it for them. But then again, that wouldn't be very Classic-like, would it? And whilst the server situation may be a bit too far gone, if we look at the sources we have available, such as ironforge.pro, about the total numbers of characters across both factions, they are not too far off from one another, about 47% Alliance to 53% Horde. A bit of a skew towards the Zogs, but nothing too crazy, I would say. If Classic has shown us one thing though, it's that if things don't change, history does tend to repeat itself. There's something which happened on retail World of Warcraft over a very long period of time, something that has started to happen during Wrath of the Lich King, and something that hasn't been fully remedied and embraced as a major expansion feature until Dragonflight. What started off as flavorful racial bonuses has escalated into things such as sharding, war mode, and finally cross-faction play, and the same problems that led to these solutions will happen in Classic. Today I'm going to explain why something so small as a difference in racial bonuses led to Blizzard breaking down the faction barrier nearly 2 decades later. Ulduar in Wrath Classic is the right time to be making this video too, because throughout Classic so far, you've nearly always gone into a raid thinking, I wonder what the bosses will be dropping tonight, not, I wonder if we're going to be progressing any further on this boss tonight. Sure, there have been fights with a degree of challenge throughout Classic so far, but Ulduar will be a step up on another level, since it's the first raid to ever offer an optional difficulty in hard mode, which has been specifically tuned up for a greater level of challenge. And whilst I can't say how Trial of the Grand Crusader or Icecrown Citadel Heroic will measure up, because we don't know if Blizzard's gonna be buffing them or not, this trend of a divide between normal mode and heroic mode only grows the longer World of Warcraft goes on. The first tier of Cataclysm, should we get there, will be hands down harder than anything in Wrath, and it won't even be close. And as raiding gets harder, people look towards the top end for guidance, tips and tricks, and to see how they are setting up and building their characters, including, of course, racials. Now I just want to mention here, this isn't supposed to devolve into a what racials are best in Wrath Classic, or a Classic good retail bad thing, or a but you guys have this for PvP so it's okay we have better racials in PvE thing. It turns out you give people a faction and they get rather tribal about it. And the thing is, we know for a fact which racials were better better and which ones have the largest impact. A recent blue post on a change to Unholy Death Knight's Summon Gargoyle ability in Classic even highlighted a specific example where a ratio made a huge difference to the point where this one race combined with this class and spec could beat anyone else in the game every single time. You could put two people of equal skill, equal gear, who get the same RNG during a fight against one another. Player A is playing a troll, player B is playing, well, it doesn't matter to be honest, because player A wins every single time, and player B probably isn't going to feel too good about that either. Berserking has to be one of the most extreme examples of a ratio which was left overpowered for so long it's hard to believe. I went and checked and it was only moved down from 20% haste to 15% in Warlords of Draenor. This is just one example of a ratio that more performance-oriented players may look towards though. Even in Wrath of the Lich King right now, how big of a difference are these ratios making at the top end? Well, I went through the logs for the top 100 players in raid damage for Phase 1, and have a guess out of the top 100 players, how many Alliance were there? If you said a grand total of 0, you would be right. Top 100 logs for overall raid damage in Phase 1, 100% Horde. I thought there might have been 1 or 2, so I decided to extend the search a bit. How many Alliance are there in the top 1000 logs for Phase 1? 1000 is a big number after all, and yes, there is going to be a few. It's not that bad. But if you said there was, out of 1000 logs, 56 Alliance, that would be correct. And to be honest, the majority are in 2 guilds which are setting themselves up for passing success, but that's kind of how passing goes. So overall, if we look at the population for Horde versus Alliance across all realms, you'll remember it was about 53% Horde players to 47% Alliance. Now if we look at the population for the top 1000 performers in Phase 1, 95% of them are Horde, 5% are Alliance. But this all doesn't really matter, does it? The top end Giga Min Maxi players are always going to do the best thing for their DPS and for their character, and very high end passing is sketchy anyways. It's just creative loopholes to get around rules to inflate your number on a third party website. This is just 1% doing 1% things, right? Well sure, it is at the moment. It seems truly unimportant. And many years ago, this was also the situation on retail too. However, much like the servers going from relatively balanced to monofaction, this will have long-term effects, and it does start right at the top with the 1%. It also starts alongside raids getting harder. The top players start making the swap to their best race, not just to pass or to speedrun, but to get the first clears in gear which can barely scrape by the DPS requirements. And in Classic, we've had plenty of knowledge in advance of the faction to play to push performance more and more, and Warcraft logs that we just looked at, that really supports it as well. Raiding is also incredibly popular in Classic. Over the past 2 weeks, there were over 20 million individual passes logged worldwide. I think retail raiding picked up in popularity considerably over time too, but it isn't as big as it once was. Still, there is a lot more difficulties in retail, so it's kind of hard to see everything in one place. But as more people get invested into raiding and to look to the top end players for help, more and more people see the fact that if I really want to improve, I should be playing a certain faction. It leads to a mental reinforcement that if I want to be good and play with good players, I should be on the Horde. This is the point where it starts to not just be the 1% anymore. It's trickling down to players who are going to take 1 month to clear the latest raid, but see and think they need to be playing a certain faction to do so. Eventually Mythic raiding releases, raids start getting even harder. We also have Mythic Plus, another feature that's only available to players on your own faction. By this point there's been years of Horde dominance in the PvE scene. Do you want to guess when the last World First was won by an Alliance guild in WoW? It was Madness of Deathwing in Kata, and I'm just saying the world's best guild at the time, Paragon, who were Horde by the way, got a ban for this tier. That probably helped out the situation quite a bit, but after so many years of the thought that you should be Horde to compete and to be able to clear, it eventually came true. Enough of the player base that did want to push performance, that wanted to try high keys, that wanted to find a guild to move to Mythic, ended up moving to Horde. Alliance guilds made shifts towards playing on Horde servers and saw their pool of applicants go up 10 times overnight. Players invested in Mythic Plus made the swap and found the group finder full all day, every day. This was not the experience they could have had on the Alliance. And finally, from starting with the 1%, moving down to the semi-hardcore, This eventually hits the casual players, and this is where it really becomes a problem. My friends have moved to the Horde. I can't play the race I want to in a fantasy world due to faction restrictions. I was a casual player in a guild, and now they've left the server. They're all gone. Would you say this won't happen again on Classic, or the ball to get this whole situation rolling hasn't already set in motion? You know, the faction change feature in the cash shop came out in original Wrath, and Blizzard have mentioned plans to bring it back for Wrath Classic. It's just not in yet. There's going to be plenty of very swift re-rollers, I am betting. So can we stop this whole situation from happening again? Well, I mean, not having faction transfers helps a lot, if I'm honest. At least people who have invested so much into their character aren't going to want to make the swap, even if it meant they would be able to improve their raid performance. Perhaps this feature shouldn't come back to the game after all. Do we remove racials? I mean, it would certainly work in the most boring way possible. And let's be honest, if racials were ever going to be removed, it would have been experimented with at some point by now in Arena, and it hasn't. I don't think this is even worth considering. Well, just to balance the racials then, duh. If only it was that easy. It can't happen ever unless they are all the same. Racials are a choice, and when you have a choice, there will be better and worse. That's choice for you. So should we just throw the floodgates open and have cross-faction play? If you remember, Classic has cross-faction battlegrounds and has had them since as early as TBC. That's certainly did not happen back in the day. If PvPers can have it, what about the rest of us? Or do we just not need to think about this yet? Cross-server play was a thing long before cross-faction came in retail, and for Classic, it doesn't look like we're getting cross-server for PvE anytime soon, if ever. We still don't even have the looking for dungeon system in Wrath Classic. On top of that, the bigger servers in Classic are locked. Unless you already play there, you cannot move a new character there or make a new character. This has been the case for some time. One of the big things that kept the trend moving towards re-rolling Horde was that everyone knew the big servers, and since on retail they can split the population up via sharding, there weren't restrictions on the transfers as there have been in Classic. These two differences between the retail and the Classic versions of the game might be bigger than we think. Overall, looking at the situation, for me, I've seen what happened in the past and how top-end players are already heavily trending towards Horde in Classic. I can't help but think what's happened in retail will repeat itself in Classic, and as per usual, at a considerably faster rate. Perhaps how the servers are in Classic with locks and no faction transfers is doing more work than we give it credit for, and this all won't be a problem until the casuals start to feel the effect, by which time, of course, it's far too late. But those are just my thoughts on the game after having played it for, you know, a little while. You reckon this will be an issue in Classic at all, where everyone feels forced to go Horde eventually? And is there a solution to this which you think could realistically work? That's all for today though. As always, thank you all so much for watching and for listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.